From the heart of our nation's capital, here's Family Research Council President Tony Perkins.
Thanks for tuning in and making Washington Watch part of your day. A tumultuous day in American politics. Former president pursued through the court system by a political adversary. And for the first time in over 100 years, a vote today in the U.S. House of Representatives to oust the Speaker.
These last few days, we've suspended the momentum that we had established the week earlier, where we were bringing bills to the floor, voting on them, staying late at night, working hard. That's what the American people expect. It's something Speaker McCarthy hasn't delivered, and that's why I've moved to vacate the chair.
That was Florida Congressman Matt Gaetz earlier today calling for the House to oust House Speaker Kevin McCarthy. California Congressman Tom McClintock, arguing against the motion, said this.
If this motion carries, the House will be paralyzed. We can expect week after week of fruitless ballots while no other business can be conducted. The Democrats will revel in Republican dysfunction, and the public will rightly be repulsed.
I am afraid that Congressman McClintock is correct. The vote just concluded, and the House of Representatives has voted to remove the Speaker. All Democrats joined 8 Republicans to oust the Speaker. We plan to get an update from Capitol Hill. Several of the members that were lined up are now in conference meeting working on what's next. And if you're a Christian business owner, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission released a proposed rule yesterday that can weaponize the law against you. What's being proposed? Former Department of Justice attorney and White House lawyer Ken Klukowski will be here later to explain. I mentioned yesterday that laws in several states like Nebraska have gone into effect protecting children from the deceptive and destructive agenda of the transgender activist. Well, FRC, along with the Center for Urban Renewal and Education, has a new joint publication, The Trans Youth Phenomenon, Critiques and Hard Questions. And it's all designed to bring truth and clarity to the public discussion where both truth and clarity have been absent. Dr. Jennifer Bowens, co-author of the publication, will join me later. And in foreign news, later this month, a reported 90 countries will attend China's third Belt and Road Forum for International Cooperation in Beijing, as China marks the 10th anniversary of their pernicious effort to advance their global dominance throughout Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. New reports are surfacing that reveal that many of these projects have halted and even appear to be crumbling. Question is why? Asian expert Gordon Chang joins us later with the answer. The website, TonyPerkins.com. Lots of resources there for you. Be sure and check it out. Also, we'll be talking about later tonight, we'll be having our Community Impact Team training from our Faith and Freedom Chapel in Baton Rouge. If you're in the Baton Rouge area, you can join us live. If not, you can join online to find out how. Text CIT to 67742. That's 67742, CIT. Our word for today comes from Romans chapter 10. But what does it say? The word is near you, in your mouth and in your heart. That is the word of faith which we preach. That if you confess with your mouth the Lord Jesus and believe in your heart that God has raised him from the dead, you will be saved. For with the heart one believes unto righteousness, and with the mouth confession is made unto salvation. For the Scripture says, whoever believes on him will not be put to shame. For there is no distinction between Jew and Greek, for the same Lord over all is rich to all who call upon him. For whoever calls on the name of the Lord shall be saved. God's invitation to experience his grace and mercy cannot be stated any more clearly. Confess and believe. To be a part of our journey through the Bible, go to frc.org/Bible. Well, as I mentioned, it's been a decade since Chinese President Xi Jinping launched his country's Belt and Road Initiative. This massive infrastructure project initially planned to link China to Europe. It has since grown to include 147 countries, 2/3 of the world's population, and as much as 40% of international GDP. But what began as an ambitious infrastructure project has seen many areas get bogged down with incomplete bridges, roads to nowhere, and mountains of debt, while China is taking over control of more countries. Joining me now to discuss this is Gordon Chang, a distinguished senior fellow at the Gatestone Institute. He's the author of The Coming Collapse of China and the Great U.S.-China Tech War. You can follow him on X under the handle at Gordon G. Chang. Gordon, welcome back to Washington Watch. Always great to see you.
Thank you so much, Tony.
So this we're coming into the end of the first decade of this ambitious infrastructure project to kind of replace the ancient Silk Road economic development for China. But now we're getting reports that a lot of these projects have been halted, in fact, crumbling because of corruption, bankruptcy, and it looks like China's taking advantage of some of these countries.
Yeah, there are a number of factors at work here, and one of them is that China works through corruption. And so they have bribed elites in countries to engage in the Belt and Road program, and that has ended up, as you say, with projects to nowhere, the things that are crumbling and all the rest of it. The big underlying point here is that China was building infrastructure that the private sector just generally shunned as uneconomic. So there was always going to be, I think, almost inevitably, these projects would fail because they just didn't make sense. And what China's goal was to extend its geopolitical influence. Countries, on the other hand, had a very different goal, which was to get infrastructure. And so there has been this problem. And right now in Beijing, there's a lot of hand-wringing because people there think that the Belt and Road plan doesn't really benefit China as the way that they had originally contemplated.
But in some cases, as I've seen, I think you and I have talked about this before, Gordon, that some of these countries that have defaulted on paying back their loans, really, China's acting like almost like loan sharks in some of these cases, and they're taking property, rare minerals, and other things from these countries.
Yes, and the geopolitical aspect here should concern us. Even though the Belt and Road program in many ways is a failure, nonetheless, it threatens the United States. So, for instance, there's a Belt and Road project in Freeport in the Bahamas. That's within 90 miles of Palm Beach. And that project, by the way, is not working out very well. And that means we could see China take it over, which means that it could become a Chinese naval base within 100 miles of Florida. So these are the things that we always have to be concerned about because China's geopolitical goals, as we know, are malicious.
I mean, this is not contained with just in a couple places. I mean, they're moving across the country, as I mentioned, across the world, 147 different countries, in particular in Africa, where they're moving in. And these are poor countries. It doesn't take a whole lot to buy influence there. And at the same time, we have a foreign policy by this administration that's pushing, in many cases, ideologies that are in complete contrast to these countries in Africa. For instance, the abortion issue, the LGBTQ. Are we not pushing them even further into the arms of China?
We certainly are, because especially in conservative Africa, you have, not only Christianity, but also generally you have this notion of traditional values. And the United States is pushing these countries to do things which they certainly find abhorrent. Now, the Chinese don't do that. The Russians don't do that, which means that these countries have a hard choice. And many of them have chosen China because, as we started to talk in the beginning of this segment, China has corrupted the elites to engage, to start these Belt and Road projects, which means the United States is even further behind in Africa than we need to be. And that is directly traceable to Biden's social policies that Africans abhor.
I wish this is one of those occasions where I wish I had a whiteboard because I'd want to write here and connect these dots, because China is funding these initiatives, buying influence, and in some cases buying countries, and they're doing it with the profits that they make off the U.S. I mean, we're the ones that are really fueling their ability to do this, are we not?
Oh, we certainly are. And also, there's another aspect to this, and that is the IMF is coming in to bail out some of these countries that owe money to China. Well, that's really a bailout of China. So, for instance, in Pakistan, where you have negotiations right now on the Belt and Road, China has the $60 billion China-Pakistan economic corridor. Some of the projects make sense, many of them don't. Pakistan can't pay back, and it's going to be the United States bailing out China, and that is just absolutely wrong.
Yeah, I mean, we're the major funder for the International Monetary Fund, and so what we have here is it's kind of like the scandals here in the United States with the payday loans, where someone goes and I mean, essentially we are impoverishing many of these countries and driving them further into debt, into the arms of China by doing this.
Yes, and the Chinese absolutely refuse to take what's called a haircut. They will not reduce their principal. And that means these countries have to surrender, as you pointed out, valuable parts of their country. So it's a loss of sovereignty. And we are seeing China take infrastructure. So, for instance, in Sri Lanka, the port of Hambantota has now become effectively a Chinese naval base in the Indian Ocean. And we see this elsewhere. And it could very well be, as I mentioned, in our own hemisphere, very close to the American homeland.
Gordon Chang, if it were not for the United States backing them up financially, not directly, but indirectly through the International Monetary Fund and through our trade deficit with them, they wouldn't be able to do this.
They certainly wouldn't be able to. It is U.S. Trade, investment, technical cooperation that has fueled China's rise. We are directly responsible for it. And this is morally wrong. China is preparing to kill Americans. That's what it's doing with its military. And also it's committing genocide and crimes against humanity in not only Xinjiang, which is the northwest part where the Uyghurs and the Kazakhs are, but also in Tibet. So it is just morally wrong for us to do this.
How fragile is the Chinese economy so that if we did get our foreign policy straight, would they come tumbling down?
They probably would, because right now we are giving them a lifeline. You know, American business should not be in China for a number of reasons. But the Biden administration is dog whistling for them to stay. Excuse me, for them to stay, and that means we are providing that critical source of funds. And essentially, what we are doing is giving them the confidence to continue their malicious policies against the U.S. They make it very clear that they view us as an existential threat and that they have to destroy America because they are worried about the inspirational impact of our values and our form of governance on the Chinese people. So there is no amicable relations we can have with China over the long term. And we have to understand that because they are out to kill Americans.
It just doesn't make sense. Gordon Chang, thanks so much for joining us. Always appreciate your insights.
Thank you so much, Tony.
Folks, I hope you're hearing what we're talking about here. I know there's a lot going on, all right, but we also have to, if we can survive this present administration, we've got to look down the lane here. We've got to see what's coming. And China is a threat, and we're fueling it, number one, with our foreign policy, as I talked about, but also you and I, not me. I quit buying Chinese products. But the American consumer, by buying cheap Chinese products, are bolstering this evil nation. All right, when we come back, we're gonna check in with a couple of members of Congress. We're going to talk to Congressman Mike Waltz of Florida. Also, we're going to talk to Congressman Mark Alford of Missouri. That's next. We'll get an update from Capitol Hill. Don't go away. We're back after this.
Everything we do begins as an idea. Before there can be acts of courage, there must be the belief that some things are worth sacrificing for. Before there can be marriage, there is the idea that man should not be alone. Before there was freedom, there was the idea that individuals are created equal. It's true that all ideas have consequences, but we're less aware that all consequences are the fruit of ideas. Before there was murder, there was hate. Before there was a Holocaust, there was the belief by some people that other people are undesirable. Our beliefs determine our behavior, and our beliefs about life's biggest questions determine our worldview. Where did I come from? Who decides what is right and wrong? What happens when I die? Our answers to these questions explain why people see the world so differently. Debates about abortion are really disagreements about where life gets its value. Debates over sexuality and gender and marriage are really disagreements about whether the rules are made by us or for us. What we think of as political debates are often much more than that. They're disagreements about the purpose of our lives and the source of truth. As Christians, our goal must be to think biblically about everything. Our goal is to help you see beyond red and blue, left and right, to see the battle of ideas at the root of it all. Our goal is to equip Christians with a biblical worldview and help them advance and defend the faith in their families, communities, and the public square. Cultural renewal doesn't begin with campaigns and elections. It begins with individuals turning from lies to truth. But that won't happen if people can't recognize a lie and don't believe truth exists. We want to help you see the spiritual war behind the political war, the truth claims behind the press release, and the forest from the trees.
Welcome back to Washington Watch, the website, TonyPerkins.com. All right, just about 30 minutes ago, House Democrats joined with 8 Republicans to oust House Speaker Kevin McCarthy. That vote took place just before I walked into the studio. The House is now in recess as the conference meets. I've got a couple of congressmen, that's a couple of our friends from the Hill, going to join us to give us a quick update. First, Florida Congressman Mike Waltz, member of the House Armed Services Committee, retired Army Colonel. Congressman Waltz, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Tony.
I'm just going to your response to what took place 30 minutes ago.
Well, Tony, in a broad sense, I certainly understand the frustration in the sense that Washington has got to change. Our debt is out of control. Our border's out of control. Inflation's out of control. And everyday Americans are suffering. But I have to tell you, I just disagree with these tactics. Just so everybody understands, without a speaker, the House can do nothing. Republicans in the House are the only Republicans in charge of anything in all of Washington. We are fighting against House Democrats, a Senate run by Democrats, and of course the entire Biden administration. And now, rather than pushing forward measures to secure the border, pro-family legislation, we passed a parental bill of rights. We need to be negotiating and pressing the Senate so that parents can take charge of education. China is breathing down our throat. All of that is ground to a halt now while we deal with this. So, Tony, in the military, we would call this a circular firing squad, or, my daughter's soccer team would call this an own goal. I just think this is incredibly unfortunate. And the happiest people in Washington are Joe Biden, Schumer, and House Democrats right now.
Well, and one reason is because, let me predict something that's going to happen here, and I talked about this yesterday. Without House Republicans moving forward on the appropriations bills, which they will not be able to do now, we are looking at a Democrat-crafted omnibus that is going to be adopted in November, or if the Republicans can hold them off until December without any type of leadership in the House, that's what's going to happen.
Yeah, that's the real irony. The main justification from Representative Gates, my colleague from Florida, and those that voted with him, was that we're not appropriating the way the Constitution and the law demands us to, that year after year we go to these big omnibus bills, and that's where you'll have the Department of Labor thrown in with the Department of Defense, thrown in with the Department of Homeland Security, and you get these 5,000-page bills. Nobody knows what's in them except a few people. The irony is that's what they're upset about. That's the reasoning for going after McCarthy. Yet by going after McCarthy and grinding our work to a halt, that's likely what we're going to end up getting. And the Democrats in the Senate are going to jam us with it. So that's why I'm so frustrated. Again, I understand. I think we all have the same goal of reforming Washington and getting good conservative policy in place. But I think these tactics will actually move us backwards. And it's putting power back in the hands of the Biden administration and Senate Democrats.
Final question for you, Congressman Waltz. What's next procedurally for the House?
Well, that's a great question. This is the first time in history that this has happened. I expect us to have a Republican conference meeting shortly. We will need to hear from former Speaker McCarthy if he is going to enter the race again, and we could have a situation like we had in January where we go round after round after round. Or someone cuts a deal with Democrats, which is horrific. Or I don't know from there, Tony. And that's what's so frustrating on top of everything else we talked about. There wasn't really a plan.
Right.
I come from the military. I've led soldiers and Green Berets in combat. You have an objective. You have a strategy to achieve the objective, and then you put resources behind it. And, with all due respect to those who are behind this, I haven't seen any of that. I think this was personal, and personal is getting in the way of good conservative policy.
Yeah, I think you're right. Congressman Waltz, always great to see you. Thanks so much for joining us.
All right. Thank you, Tony.
Hey, folks, it's a reason to pray. I will tell you, we need to be praying for our country. Joined now by Missouri Congressman Mark Alford, who was with us yesterday. Congressman Alford, thanks so much for stepping out and joining us. Your take on today's vote.
Well, Tony, I'm upset. I'm troubled. I do know that God is in control. There are 4 words above the speaker's rostrum there in the U.S. House of Representatives. It says, "In God we trust." God is in control of this. He's going to find a solution or present us with his solution in his due time. And we prayed in the well with the chaplain of the House, Margaret Gibbons, and about 10 other members, just praying for God to lead us and direct us. We're a ship without a rudder right now. Kicking Kevin McCarthy out of the speaker's chair is, I think, done a disservice to our body. It's done a disservice to America. Kevin has worked so hard and so tirelessly trying to appease these 5 or 6 people who he was never going to win over to begin with, and yet he tried from the very beginning.
Yeah.
We got down to actually doing business. I mean, we passed since January and February some really substantial things, as Michael Waltz talked about. I'm not going to go through those. We were passing these appropriation bills, the very thing that the Freedom Caucus, and in particular these 5 or 6 individuals, wanted. We were getting the business done, and now that is ground to a complete halt. And guess what I just got, Tony? A fundraising email from Matt Gaetz, raising money off of this because he has destroyed what we have built in the 8 or 9 months that I have been here. Some momentum in changing America. The very thing that they claim they want, they have now destroyed.
Wow. Well said. Congressman Alford, thanks so much for taking time to join us today. Always great to hear your perspective on things.
Thank you, Tony. God bless.
Congressman Mark Alford of Missouri. Look, this procedure was there, and as was made reference to, it's only been used once before, introduced, but never actually accomplished. This is the first time they've ousted a speaker. And just because you can do it doesn't mean you should. It is there for extreme circumstances. I'm very concerned with what I see happening in society as a whole, but it's led by our government. What we saw during the Trump administration, 2 impeachments. And I warned back then that was going to open the door for Republicans to do the same thing. Justified or not, we have pierced the veil of civility in this country. And once we no longer operate in a way that is under the moral guidance of God and our Constitution, we become at risk. All right, don't go away, folks. We're on the We're coming back on the other side of the break.
All of us are born with the desire to find truth and meaning. Where did I come from? What happens when I die? While our answers to these questions may divide us, we are united in our need for the freedom to answer life's biggest questions and make life's biggest decisions for ourselves. That's why religious freedom matters for everyone. Religious freedom matters because the powerful have long wanted to control those who are less powerful. Religious freedom matters because the freedom of those who are different is often threatened by those who believe different is dangerous. Leah Sheribu, a Christian teenager in Nigeria, remains a captive of Boko Haram for her refusal to renounce her Christian faith. Chinese pastor Wang Yi is serving a 9-year sentence for speaking publicly against the Chinese government. In Pakistan, Asif Pervez is on death row for allegedly sending a blasphemous text message. All of this because people in power decided different is dangerous. At the Center for Religious Liberty at Family Research Council, we promote religious freedom for everyone because the only alternative is religious freedom for no one. We encourage Americans and the American government to engage and advocate for the persecuted, and they do. We work every day to bring good news to the afflicted, to proclaim liberty to captives and freedom to prisoners. We do it because that's what Jesus does. We work to give freedom to others because we ourselves have been set free.
Welcome back to Washington Watch. Good to have you with us on this Tuesday. The website, TonyPerkins.com. I want to clarify something I said as we were rushing out. I was trying to make the break. I'm not suggesting what happened today was in any way unconstitutional. This was the rules of the House. But we have to look more broadly at what's happening in our country and how things are just kind of coming apart. As I talked about the impeachments of Trump, now the impeachments of Biden, it's like now we just go after our political enemies. We see what's happening with President Trump in New York. You know, John Adams, second president of the United States, said our government, our laws were made for a moral and religious people, our Constitution. It's wholly inadequate for the government of any other. We have to self-govern ourselves, and that means we've got to treat each other with respect. And I'm very concerned with what I see happening. I mean, Kevin McCarthy, not the most, do I agree with him on everything? No. But I will say that he was the most conservative speaker we've had. Our hope was to get to a more conservative speaker, but now is not the time. I do not see that happening. I see the House plunging into chaos. All right, let me move on. The Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, or EEOC, published its proposed new rules for workplace harassment yesterday. And here's what it could do. It could have a chilling effect on Christian business owners as it puts onto a collision course religious freedom and the whole transgender agenda. The proposed rule cites the Supreme Court's Bostock versus Clayton decision, stating that sex-based discrimination includes discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity, allowing them to redefine harassment to include alleged offenses such as, are you ready for this? Not using someone's preferred pronouns or preventing someone from using private spaces that do not match their biological sex. Joining me now to discuss this, Ken Klukowski, former senior counsel in the Civil Rights Division of the U.S. Department of Justice and former special counsel in the White House Office of Budget Management and Budget. He also litigated constitutional cases in the U.S. Supreme Court. Ken, welcome back to Washington Watch.
Thanks for having me, Tony.
All right, so what did I miss on these new rules?
Well, it's I don't think you missed anything. I think you've touched on some major points on it. This is a proposed rule, so this is not set in stone yet. There is a window for acting on it, but I think you're correctly flagging concerns that faithful Christians and adherents of various traditional faiths would have in terms of what the EEOC is trying to press upon them here.
Now, they had tried, if I'm not mistaken, they had tried this, but they got knocked down by a court, so they're coming back now with this proposed rule, right?
It's been an ongoing process, and yes, there have been multiple stages. The latest one here is the EEOC promulgating what's called a proposed rule that opens a window for public comment. Then those comments have to be digested, they have to be examined, they have to be studied. For what are called substantial comments, the agency either needs to make changes or they need to create a written record as to why they think the concern is unfounded. And then after all that, that's when you get a final rule that actually takes effect.
So I think the rule period, the comment period is between now and November the 1st, if I'm not mistaken. Will they actually read these rules? I mean, these comments, can these comments stop one of these rules from going into place?
Great question. Really, comments, you can put them into two baskets that have different effects. One is the sheer number of comments, and of course you have a lot of listeners, and so our show today could have an impact on that. They are required to read every single rule. Now, many comments can be cut and paste, can be short, they aren't really saying much. The agency still doesn't know until they read it. So if they get 150,000 comments, 300,000 comments, they have to actually read through all those. Sometimes they hire staff in contract with people and stuff to actually accelerate that process. But that can take weeks or even months. It can take multiple months. Then you also have substantive comments. And understand a comment, like a substantive comment, might not be like a paragraph. It can be several pages. It can have some dense data included in it. And for those substantive comments, that's the second thing that can delay implementation, is that for substantive comments, the agency has to do more than read it. They need to articulate it in the record that they're acknowledging the substantive comment that they're looking at. And then they need to give a written response on the record to that comment. Now, if comments are pretty much identical in their substance, like if you get 10 comments, they're pretty much saying the same thing, then that could be styled as one substantive comment. But if there's some meaty content in that comment, then the agency has to actually articulate a response. They either need to change the rule at that point, or they need to give a written explanation as to why they think that the rule will not result in any harm that's articulated in the comment. Or if they attempt to ignore it, people can sue over that.
That was my next question, because we're up against a break. But if they fail to address these comments, this opens them up for individuals taking them to court to sue to stop this rule, correct?
That's exactly right. Okay. If they either ignore them or if they respond and say there's no big deal, either way, the commenters can actually bring litigation.
Okay. King Kulkowski, we're out of time, but always great to get your legal insight, and we're going to be following up on this, I can assure you.
Always great to be with you, Tony. Thank you. God bless.
All right, folks, don't go away. We're coming back with more Washington Watch right after this message.
The world is hurting. Streets are filled with crime. Families are broken. Sin is celebrated, and God is mocked. Everywhere we look, the wages of our sin are on full display. As Christians, we know that surrender to God's will is the solution to our biggest problems, but not everyone agrees. Even in church, we hear people say the most important thing is to be tolerant, that we shouldn't impose our morality on other people, and that loving our neighbor means celebrating what they do. But you can't do that. It's not that you don't love your neighbor, you do, but you care about God's opinion more than your neighbor's opinion, and this makes you different. In fact, sometimes it makes you feel alone, like you're the only one. But there is good news. You are not alone, not even close. Research has found that there are 59 million American adults who are a lot like you. There are millions of people around the country who are born again, deeply committed to practicing their faith, and believe the Bible is the reliable Word of God. But that's not all. They're also engaged in our government. They're voters. They're more likely to be involved in their community, and they're making a difference in elections. The problem is that a lot of them feel alone too. We want to change that. FRC wants to connect these 59 million Americans to speak the truth together, no matter the cost. If you want to learn more about this group and what it means to be a spiritually active, governance-engaged conservative, or if you want to find out if you are one of these SageCons yourself, go to frc.org/SageCon and take the quiz to find out. The world is hurting, and we have the solution. We can't do it alone, but we can do it if we work together. That's what we're working toward every day. Join us. Go to frc.org/SAGECON, SageCon, to learn more. That's SAGECON, SageCon, to learn more.
I'm often asked by people, Tony, how do you stay encouraged? How do you deal with all of the stuff in Washington, D.C., the negative policies that are attacking our faith, our family, and our freedoms? Well, you want me to let you in on the secret? It's called the Word of God. And that is why the Family Research Council embarked on Stand on the Word, a 2-year journey through the Bible. It's a chronological Bible reading plan with just 10 to 15 minutes a day. In 2 years, you will have covered the entire Bible. And to go along with this, Monday through Friday, I do a morning devotional that goes along with the reading of the day. It's all designed to encourage you on this journey because the Word of God, as the psalmist said, in my affliction, here's my comfort. Your Word gives me life. That is our source of strength. To find out more, go to tonyperkins.com or frc.org/Bible. And I invite you to join me every morning for our Stand on the Word Bible devotion.
FRC, celebrating 40 years with Senator Kevin Cramer.
Well, first of all, let me just say thank you to FRC and their staff for doing two things that I think are so important in representative government. One is, as I like to say, is that you hold us accountable. But what's more important is that you're an extension of your representative government. You are an extension of those of us who take the pledge and pledge our allegiance to our country and to our Constitution, but lean heavily on you and what you provide. So keep up the great work. We need you.
Welcome back to Washington Watch. Good to have you with us on this Tuesday. And on this rule that we were talking about, the EEOC, we're going to have more information on how you can make a comment. So stand by. That'll be coming in the next day or two as we prepare that. All right, in probably a little more than an hour, the Family Research Council will be holding its community impact training at our Faith and Freedom Chapel in Baton Rouge. Joining me now in studio to discuss tonight's event and how community impact training can help your church make a difference in your community is Tim Throckmorton, National Director for Community Impact here at the Family Research Council. Tim, welcome back to Washington Watch.
Thank you, sir. Glad to be here.
So let's, by the way, folks, before I go any further, let me just say this. If you would like to join us tonight, you can join online or you can join in person. If you're in the area, just text CIT to 67742. That's 67742. You have to register to be a part of it, or you can go to tonyperkins.com. So what can they expect tonight, Tim?
Well, we're going to talk about how you can start a community impact team in your church that will affect your community, your state, and the nation. One of the questions I get around the country, Tony, is what can I do? Yeah. Parents, grandparents, how can I help? What can I do? And this is a tangible way that people can get involved very simply in a local arena, but often getting involved with a community impact team leads to involvement in local the local civic arena, and many people are running for office now who started out as members of a community impact team.
Yeah, it's right where you are. It's kind of like Nehemiah and building the wall right there in front of your house. So we talk about what's happening in our nation. We've been talking about what's happening in Washington on Capitol Hill today. And this is, we need to think nationally but act locally. and we can make a difference right where we are. And you have the tools through the Community Impact Team. So what kind of things will they learn tonight?
They'll learn how to build a team, who to look for, the type of individuals in a church who can be a part of that team or should be a part of that team with their giftings, and then how those giftings with this team's structure can influence local elections, school boards. You can have a lasting impact educationally through local schools, Christian schools. They can get involved in the electoral process, which again, that's that door of understanding. A lot of folks don't understand how government works in America anymore. Well, this is a way to not only understand, but to put your hands to work.
Right. And tonight we're gonna be looking at a couple of these issues that have people concerned: election integrity. We're going to be joined by former Secretary of State of Ohio, Ken Blackwell, who is a special advisor on election integrity for FRC Action, talking about the states that have changed their laws since 2020. We're also going to talk about what different election laws have. Now, Louisiana, New Jersey, Mississippi, and Virginia all have elections this fall. And so there's folks, actually, I voted today. That's why I got this little sticker on. I voted early. And so we're going to talk a little bit about where you can find out about your particular state and what's happening in your state, but also certain laws that have been changed that we don't really like, but they're in place, like early voting, voting by mail, and we need to use those tools. Ballot collection. We have churches. We're going to be talking with Gina Gleason from California, where California churches actually did ballot collections, and they won congressional seats as a result.
It's like Jeremiah said, seeking the welfare of the city, the country where you are. And that's what folks get to do. They get to be involved in the process, bringing their biblical worldview values to bear in that civic arena. And they not only begin to understand things better, but they begin to see how the issues, how the Bible speaks to the issues that local politics, national and state politics, how that meshes together and how we are to be involved, engaged as salt and light.
All right, Tim Throckmorton, that begins at 6:30 Central Time this evening. And again, folks, if you'd like to be a part of that, you can join online or in person. Go to TonyPerkins.com or text CIT to 67742. Tim, look forward to seeing you tonight.
Yes, sir. Looking forward to it.
All right, this week, the Family Research Council, along with the organization Do No Harm and the Center for Urban Renewal and Education, published the Trans Youth Phenomenon, Critiques and Hard Questions. This new report addresses the difficult questions concerning the ideological underpinnings of the gender transitioning of minors, the physiological procedures currently being employed on minors, the ability of minors to consent, and the deficient justifications for increasingly intensive interventions. And it's an excellent resource for anyone looking for guidance on this important subject. Joining me now to discuss this is Dr. Jennifer Bowens, Director of the Center for Family Studies here at the Family Research Council. Dr. Bowens, welcome back to Washington Watch.
It's good to be back, Tony.
So tell us about this new publication and why it is so necessary at this time.
Yeah, so this resource is intended to be kind of for policymakers, first of all, because a lot of the testimonies that we've given at the state level or even up on the Hill have been the questions have that we've answered have been about these issues. So we put this together because we just kept hearing these questions over and over, and these are the issues that scaffold the trans issue, and the research that's used to come alongside and push these very invasive physiological interventions. So this is a great resource because it includes a lot of citations, a lot of the research that has been used to promote these procedures. So it's all in one place. Pretty much every question that's been asked on this issue is included in this packet here.
So who is this targeted toward in terms of who benefits most from having access to this publication?
So really, we wrote this with the intention that this would be used for policymakers, but it's so user friendly that it is really for anyone who has questions, or maybe you're a parent or a grandparent and you have a child that you care about who's come home from school and they're giving some of the same lines that we often hear, that if I don't transition, I'm going to commit suicide. Or, what are some of the root issues that go along with someone who claims to be transgender? So we talk about the social contagion factor. And then we also talk about some of the things that maybe if you've been following this issue, some of the arguments or the logic that hasn't been presented in some of the public forums. For example, I speak a little bit about the DSM, that's the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders. And I look at the gender dysphoria diagnosis and compare it to other diagnoses that are listed in the DSM that would be for children, and how we approach a diagnosis for children, and how gender dysphoria is different. And these aren't necessarily hard factual things, but just things to say, hey, there's a little bit of a difference in how we approach gender dysphoria, and why is that the case? So it's a thought-provoking document, as well as providing some real counters to the arguments that have been proposed in the psychological and medical fields.
So let me ask you about that, Dr. Ballins. Give me two ways in which gender dysphoria is treated differently than some other disorder.
Yeah, so there's a class of disorders in the DSM that specifically are given when a person has a long pattern of behavior or thought. And typically, when we're working with a child, we don't want to diagnose them until they're 18. And why is that? Well, we know that the child is still developing and they're still changing. And so you want to wait until their brain and their development has reached a certain marker. And so when they've reached that marker, then we kind of go back and say, let's look at this, and maybe they do in fact have this disorder. But what you have with gender dysphoria is somebody receiving a diagnosis within 6 months, before they're 18, before they've completed development. And then when you compare these types of diagnoses and the interventions attached to them, what you find is that gender dysphoria has a far more invasive, and actually more invasive than any other diagnosis in the DSM. So not only are we diagnosing early with something that would be considered a lifelong enduring pattern, but we're also attaching interventions that are really dangerous and life-altering while a person's still a child.
So when you're talking about these invasive, we're talking about surgeries and irreversible treatments?
Yeah, that's right. We're talking about making alterations to one's physiology that are irreparable, and certainly we don't even know the psychological ramifications of these interventions. And that hasn't been studied.
You touched on this. One of the reasons that we wait until a child reaches adulthood into a certain age is because well into adulthood, the brain is continuing to develop. So for a adolescent to be able to make a decision that is going to have effects upon their life for the rest of their life, that's not something that we've historically allowed in this country.
Yeah, that's right. And that's why we don't give diagnoses that are in the DSM that are heavier diagnoses that indicate someone has a lifelong pattern until they're 18. So then it's out of character, so to speak, to give a child such a heavy diagnosis that says this is how you'll always identify.
Is a 2 or 3 year phase, is that a lifelong pattern?
not when you're a child.
Right.
I mean, think about how many of us, I mean, I myself thought I'd be an astronaut for several years, but I was influenced greatly by Star Wars. Now, I'm not an astronaut.
I thought I'd be a radio talk show host when I was a kid. Look what happened.
Look what happened. So some patterns are enduring, but it's better to wait until a person reaches adulthood to make those lifelong decisions.
So we see the differences there. Now I'm going to ask you a question. Why? Why? Why do we treat this different than any other condition?
Well, I think there are many factors, but I think for our purposes today, one that's worth noting is the political factor. And even trans advocates, I'll get that out, they actually can get upset with the US and our use of gender dysphoria in the DSM, because a lot of activists believe that this is a civil rights issue and that it shouldn't be treated as a clinical issue. But they will say, especially those from other countries, will make comments that America has to for insurance purposes. So, you know, what you see in the activist space is a lot of times using the DSM for the purposes, the end goal of transitioning or imposing these medical interventions on children. When it's convenient. And that's not to say that there isn't a real issue that some kids suffer, but to divorce this idea from politics would be equally wrong and not paint a clear picture of what's going on in politics and the DSM.
So in this publication, The Trans Youth Phenomenon, Critiques and Hard Questions, Dr. Ballens, you and your co-authors seek to kind of cut through the political and take us to the fact-based evidence that is behind this issue so that policymakers, parents, and others will know how to deal with it.
That's right. That's the purpose of this document.
All right. And where can folks get a copy besides TonyPerkins.com?
At frc.org. It's on the main homepage.
All right. Once again, great work, Dr. Ballens. Always great to have you on the program, and glad you're at the Family Research Council.
Me too.
All right, folks, you can get a copy of this good stuff. It really is, because you need to know. You need to know how to respond to this cultural hysteria that is leading young people down this dark, dangerous, destructive path. So find out more, go to TonyPerkins.com or frc.org, and you can get a copy. All right, again, coming up at 6:30 Eastern Time, 6:30 Central Time, 7:30 Eastern Time, you can be a part of the Community Impact Team training and also get an update on what's happening with election integrity and what you can do to make a difference in the upcoming elections. Text CIT to 67742 to register and be a part. Until next time, I leave you once again with the encouraging words of the Apostle Paul found in Ephesians 6, where he says, when you've done everything you can do, when you've prayed, when you've prepared, and when you've taken your stand, by all means, keep standing.
Washington Watch with Tony Perkins is brought to you by Family Research Council and is entirely listener-supported. Portions of the show discussing candidates are brought to you by Family Research Council Action. For more information on anything you've heard today, or to find out how you can partner with us in our ongoing efforts to promote faith, family, and freedom, visit TonyPerkins.com. Also, to leave a comment about Washington Watch, call our watch line at 1-866-372-7234. That's 1-866-372-7234.